What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss even more new changes in iOS 17.4, and we're also going to touch on the changes that were just mysteriously removed at the last minute by Apple. We'll also discuss why the death of the Apple Car project is actually a good thing, fresh iOS 18 rumors, a crazy AirTag story, and more. And as always, if you want to stay updated with everything going on in the world of Apple, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, and also subscribe to the newsletter, The Apple Den, also linked in the description below. Again, another banger went out yesterday. All right, so let's talk about iOS 17.4 first, because this is a very strange release. So first off, the public release of 17.4 is coming out early next week. If you are a public beta tester or a registered developer, you got the RC or release candidate version earlier in the week this week, and that's essentially going to be the final version. However, I do think there is going to be a different build number come next week, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the reason I say that the RC release was weird is because Apple removed multiple changes, and they also decided to reverse course on something that they removed before, and now they're adding it back. So let me break it down. Okay, so the first one, and this one doesn't make sense at all, but if you play a podcast, the widget here on previous iOS 17.4 betas would show up in the color of the artwork there, kind of like music does. If we go to my music one right here, you can see how it blends in with the cover art there. And in previous iOS 17.4 betas, that happened with the podcast application or widget as well, but that's been removed. It's not here in 17.4 RC. And another feature they removed is when you tap on the episode, it goes to the main episode page instead of popping up a little info bar like it did previously. Oh, and also SharePlay with HomePod and Apple TV has also been removed. So that was in multiple betas, but that's been removed in the RC. And here's a weird one that I really don't understand. So if you go to your lock screen and you go to create a new wallpaper, we're just going to go to add, we'll just do this wallpaper right here. And if we go to add that and we set as wallpaper pair on previous iOS 17.4 betas, it would not blur the background as default, but now Apple has reverted back to what they've done beforehand, and it automatically blurs the wallpaper pair on the home screen. So I'm really not sure why they reverted back on that change. Also, the stopwatch live activity is still missing. This was gone in beta 4 as well, but now if you do a stopwatch, you can see there is no live activity up there in the dynamic island, even though we had that on previous betas. And then in Safari, the wider Safari address bar has been reverted back to just the default address bar. So it was a little bit bigger and wider, and I actually liked it a lot better on previous 17.4 betas, but Apple has reverted this back to look like every other version of iOS 17. Oh, and I did also want to mention that you can see we now have the Apple Cash card there in Safari autofill. So that is also brand new with iOS 17.4. You can have a new virtual card number for your Apple Cash card, which is a debit card, but you can now use that in Safari autofill, even if it doesn't accept Apple Pay, like if a website doesn't accept Apple Pay. Now, something that Apple announced with iOS 17.4 is that they would be removing home screen web applications for those in the EU, because you're going to be able to sideload and things like that. Apple took it away from EU users. However, there was strong criticism from the very beginning, and I guess that got to Apple because just a couple of days ago, Apple came out and said they're reverting that back. You will be able to have home screen web applications in the EU now. So that has been reversed. That was not available in the 17.4 betas, but now it is going to be available once 17.4 gets released to the public. And that is just one of the reasons I think that we could see a new build number for iOS 17.4 come early next week. And I mean a different build number compared to the RC version. I think we might have a different build number for that reason, and also for the fact that Apple said they're going to fix the bug of this pop-up right here that you see when you go to install an application. Apple apparently says that's not supposed to be seen by the end user. All right, so yeah, as you can see, 17.4 RC is just a really weird release. I mean, Apple has removed several changes, and I don't think I've ever seen Apple remove so many different features and changes from a software before the final release. I don't think I've ever seen it. But anyways, we do have some good news here. So if you go down to stolen device protection, apparently this was in beta before iOS 17.4. So with iOS 17.4 RC, stolen device protection is now officially out of beta. So in theory, it should work a lot better and it should not get your familiar locations mixed up. Now 17.4 does also give us this new city digital widget, which I love. The only thing I don't like about it is the fact that it does not change appearance based on your system appearance. So you can see I'm in dark mode, but it's still in light mode. So maybe that'll get tweaked great in a future version, who knows. And then in the code of iOS 17.4 RC, MacRumors found source code that indicated that there's going to be new spring Apple Watch band colors coming soon. And these new spring colors include light blue, ocean blue, pink, raspberry, soft mint, and sunshine. And there's also 2 Hermes colors, so blue Celeste and Juan de Naples. And then also in the code were hints and pictures of Beats Solo 4 headphones. So these look similar to the Solo 3s, but it looks like spatial audio will be supported according to the code. And there were also 3 different colors in the files in 17.4 RC. Those were black, pink, and blue. Oh, and one thing I do want to share is if you go to Apple Music and go to the Home tab right here, and then you scroll down to Made for You, there's a new playlist called Heavy Rotation Mix. And this is going to show you all the songs you've been playing a lot lately, and it updates every single day. So it puts all your most popular songs that you listen to into one playlist, and it updates every day, which is awesome. Obviously, Spotify's had that for a very long time, but it's great to see it finally make its way to Apple Music. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to touch on is if you go into your music recognition history here, we're going to go to a song, and in my What's New video for iOS 17.4 RC, multiple people mentioned how this has always been there, where it says music, open, and add to, and you've always been able to add to an Apple Music playlist. And that is actually true. I did check it on older devices, but what's new here is up in the ellipsis menu up in the top right. When you tap on that, that's where you can now see listen and music, add to playlist, and also more ways to listen. If you have Spotify installed, you can also listen to it on Spotify as well. So it's just new here up in this menu. That's why Apple mentioned it in the release notes for RC. Now, as far as the performance goes, I have been using iOS 17.4 on my main device ever since it was released, and it's been great. I mean, I've had no complaints whatsoever with performance on iOS 17.4. Obviously, the big, notification center bug has been fixed, which has been nice. So that's, great. I'm not having any type of issues on the lock screen, home screen, really anywhere. So no complaints whatsoever about performance here on 17.4. I did previously say that there's not a big difference from 17.3, but after using 17.3 to compare to 17.4, for my upcoming video, I have to say that performance does feel a bit better here on iOS 17.4. And then when it comes to the battery life, this is another area where I've noticed a difference in battery life. And I'm not just talking about the RC of 17.4, just 17.4 in general. So I'm going to bring over my main device here, which I have been using since day one, and we can see what my battery has been looking like. So over the past 24 hours, it's pretty hard to tell there. I mean, I've just been charging it a lot, but let's take a look at the last 10 days. So the RC build was released on Tuesday right there, and I have been using my phone quite a bit, more than last week it looks like, but you can still see how the battery is stacking up to the previous beta. I would expect a minor bump in battery life for most people, especially on the iPhone 15 series, but it's not really going to make a huge difference overall. I noticed about 30 minutes more of on-screen time, which is nice. It is noticeable for me since I do test it all the time, but for you, it might not be as noticeable. However, if you did have any type of battery drain issue, that could very well be resolved with 17.4. All right, so now let's talk about what to expect next from Apple, because this is where it gets a little bit tricky and it's a little bit different than anything we've seen throughout iOS 17. So first off, early next week, we will see iOS 17.4 get released to the public. We should see that on Monday the 4th. It is possible to go to the 5th or the 6th, but I just don't see that as being very likely. Apple typically sticks to those Monday releases. So I would bang on March 4th being the day that we see iOS 17.4 get released to the public. Now, I said it gets tricky because if you remember earlier this week, we did not get RC builds for watchOS, for tvOS, for macOS, for anything else aside from iOS and iPadOS. And since we've not had an RC build for any of those other versions, we might not be seeing a final public release for macOS, watchOS, or tvOS next week. However, we could be seeing the RC build next week. So either the day of iOS 17.4 getting released to the public or even the next day. And then we should see a final public release for all of those other, versions come on potentially March 11th. Now, there is a very slim possibility that Apple just completely skips the RC build. I see that as being very unlikely because Apple does typically need an RC build just to make sure and test everything to make sure everything works properly. So there is a slim chance that we just go straight to the final release, but I can't recall the last time Apple ever did that. Now, there is also a scenario where we maybe get the RC early in the week and then we get the final release later on in the week of March 4th. All right, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And let's start with the biggest news of the week in regards to Apple, and that is the fact that the Apple Car project has been officially canceled. And while many people saw this as a bad thing, I think it's a good thing for multiple reasons, and especially if you are a CarPlay user. So Apple's COO had to tell 2,000 employees that the Apple Car project was canceled earlier this week, and many that were involved in that project were moved over to Apple's artificial intelligence division to work on generative AI features that are coming to iOS 18 and all of Apple's future platforms. And the whole reason that Apple canceled the whole Apple Car project is, in my opinion, first off, I think Tesla absolutely is what killed Apple's hopes and dreams of ever having an Apple Car take complete market share, over the EV space. I think Tesla is the Apple of the EV space, and I think it's going to remain that way for a very long time. And I think Apple, had to spend 10 years and $10 billion to realize that they're not going to be able to compete with Tesla. And a big reason I say that is because the Apple Car was allegedly going to have a price of over $100,000 and it would also have razor thin profit margins. And when you have a Tesla that costs like 30 to 40 grand, why would you spend 100 grand on an Apple Car, especially when it's likely to be inferior at least for a while? So I just think there's a lot of reasons that went into the Apple Car project getting canceled, but I think Tesla is going to be the main reason the Apple Car was canceled, in my opinion. Now, hear me out. I also have a theory here. I think that Apple knew the Apple Car project was dying for a while and they knew it would kind of fizzle out. And that's why they decided to introduce CarPlay 2.0 at WWDC 2022. And now we're finally seeing that later this year. And the only reason I say that is because the Apple CarPlay 2.0, like the next generation CarPlay, is going to be able to tap in to the car's control modules where you can see and customize the look of the instrument cluster. So if you have a screen up there where the instrument cluster is with CarPlay 2.0, of course, in 2024 and up cars, you're going to be able to completely customize the look of those gauge clusters and things like that. So that is something I feel like if Apple was going to release a car, they would not really want that to be in CarPlay itself and be in every other car out there. They would want that to be special for the Apple iCar or Apple Car, whatever it was going to end up being called. So I just think that the whole cancellation of this project means good news for CarPlay because a lot of the software they were probably working on for the Apple Car is likely to come out in the form of CarPlay enhancements. So from here on out, I would expect to see, bigger changes to CarPlay with major iOS releases like iOS 18, iOS 19, iOS 20. We're probably going to see even more changes to CarPlay in the coming years because of the fact that the Apple Car project is canceled. And I put this in my newsletter, which by the way, if you want to read it all, I kind of put it on screen anyways, but if you want to read it, it's down in the description below. But I do also think that Apple wants to still dominate the car market, but they want to dominate the software side of the car market, not the physical car. And I think they're going to do that with CarPlay. And what if there was a time, like what if there was a time in the future where Tesla had CarPlay integrated for maybe like $5 or $10 a month? Would you do it? I mean, because me with the Tesla, I would consider it if it was good enough. So I don't know. I just see that Apple could turn CarPlay into, a costly or a monthly service for those who don't support CarPlay natively, like Rivian, like Tesla and GM. But all in all, I think it's a good thing because now all that money they had tied up and all that money going into the Apple Car can go other places. And of course, CarPlay will also thrive from that as well, in my opinion. So what do you think about this whole ordeal? Now, speaking of money and costs for Apple, we also saw the final cost for the Apple Vision Pro headset. And now these are estimates, but this is according to Omdia, and they calculated that the components that were used to construct the Vision Pro were estimated to cost $1,542. So given the fact that the headset starts at $34.99, the profit margins are around 55%. Now, what's interesting is that of all the components that went into this, the pair of micro OLED displays that are in each eye, those cost the most. So they were $228 per display. That is $456 per headset just for those micro OLED displays. And then if you combine that with the external display, that brings the total for the 3 displays to $530 or 35% of the total cost of the headset. And if you combine that with the M2 and R1 chips, it gives you around 50% of the total cost of the headset. So with 50% of the cost going into the displays, which are brand new displays for Apple, and also the R1 chip, which is brand new for Apple, those are going to go down drastically over the years. Anytime there's a first generation product, Apple, for example, or any company is going to have a much more limited run. It's also going to cost a lot more money to get the molds made and get everything made, to put it into production. So by the next time there's a new version that comes out, it's going to be significantly cheaper. So I definitely think that the second generation Vision Pro will be a good bit cheaper. I think Apple is going to get the cost down below $1,000 for Vision Pro 2 or whatever it ends up being called. And according to Ming-Chi Kuo, we're not going to see the Apple Vision Pro 2 until 2027. And speaking of the Vision Pro, if you guys were on Reddit or on Twitter this past week, you probably saw a lot of people posting about CrackGate, which is a crack that goes down the very center of the Apple Vision Pro headset. Apparently, this is a real thing. I mean, I saw several owners reporting this mysterious crack on social media, Reddit, wherever. And, I still think this is a very small number of people that are actually being affected by this. I don't know anybody personally that has this issue. I've been checking mine every day because I'm just so worried about it cracking right there. But yeah, this seems to be a very, very, small number of people who are actually having this issue. But of course, it is magnified by social media. It makes it seem like it's more of an issue than it really is. Okay, so now let's talk about iOS 18. So if you were wanting a full redesign of the software, unfortunately, that does not look like it's going to be happening. So according to Mark Gurman, iOS 18 is going to have visionOS inspired design elements, but it's not going to be a complete overhaul like some people were anticipating. And when he says design elements, I see this as being elements inside of the settings application or, changes inside of our default applications like messages, phone, all of that. You're not going to see any major change on the home screen or like the lock screen. It's going to be inside of applications when we're talking about elements, in my opinion. This is just all speculation at this point, according to Gurman. Now, he did also say that for macOS, there is going to be a revamp. And by this, I assume he's talking about a full-on revamp, a full-on redesign. He's expecting that in the next 1 to 2 years. So not this year, but potentially the next year or the following year, we could see a revamp for macOS, which will be nice. Now, if you're asking me personally, I don't care one bit about a redesign with iOS 18. The only thing I'm looking for in this upcoming software are the AI features, the AI capabilities, because we've heard about AI in iOS 18 nonstop for the past several months now. So I think that it's pretty much confirmed at this point that we are going to have multiple new AI, generative AI, machine learning features and changes added into iOS 18. And I think, I predict that we're going to see those in applications like messages and shortcuts and Safari, basically all the default applications. I think it's going to be where we start seeing those changes. And also, of course, Siri. Siri is going to get a lot smarter now. And also during Apple's annual shareholders meeting that happened this week, Tim Cook said that the company is going to break new ground in generative AI in 2024 and said, quote, "We believe it will unlock transformative opportunities for our users." And also, according to a new report from TrendForce, AI server makers such as Supermicro are aggressively expanding its efforts to secure AI orders from Apple. So I don't think I've ever seen so much hype for an iOS version ever. I mean, usually the hype comes after it gets announced because that's when we see the new features. But I don't think I've ever seen this much hype this many months away from the unveiling, because again, we're not going to see iOS 18 unveiled until June at the Worldwide Developers Conference, and people are like stumbling over their feet right now. Everybody's so excited about iOS 18. It's a great time to be alive because I'm here for it. It's just funny that I've not seen something hyped up, software-wise in forever. I don't think I've ever seen it this hyped up. And then finally, as tradition here on the channel, let's talk about another crazy AirTag story. So this time, a woman who was working in Texas got suspicious one day when she noticed that on the security camera that a mysterious woman was inspecting the roof of her minivan while it was out in the parking lot as she was at work. And the very next day, that mystery woman was back, and this time she parked right next to the woman's van in the work parking lot and then walked behind it for a few minutes and then left. So after 2 days of seeing this lady around her car, she called the police and had them search it to see if they found anything, but they did not find anything on the minivan. But she was still suspicious. So she's smart because she Googled common hiding places for AirTags and then learned that people often put them behind the license plate. So she went out to her van and sure enough, there it was. an AirTag taped to a magnet that was wedged behind her license plate. She started crying and frantically called the police once again. This time, they responded and got a search warrant to track down the Apple account of the AirTag, and it led back to a woman who just so happened to be her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend. Shocker. These stories are almost always domestic. Anyways, she was arrested and charged with unlawful installation of a tracking device, but she bonded out of jail and the case was dismissed. However, the case has since been refiled and a new warrant has been issued for the stalker's arrest. And also in this news interview, they talked to somebody in domestic violence and they say that this has apparently become a big problem for domestic violence victims, this whole stalking with AirTags thing. So, and that's kind of backed up from my stories here on the channel. I mean, I've been covering AirTag stories for what, like 3 years now, every single week. And so many of them, I would say maybe 70 to 80% of them are domestic. So just be careful out there. Be careful who you get in relationships with, and just always pay attention to things and always look for that unknown AirTag pop-up that comes up on your phone, and don't just take that, just don't take that as maybe somebody forgot something. Be suspicious of that if you ever see it. You don't want to be getting stalked somewhere. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to subscribe to the newsletter down there in the description below. Also, be sure to subscribe if you've not done so already. I will have that 17.4 video coming out early next week and a lot more videos coming after that. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.